Last night, the Wizards agreeing to send Russell Westbrook to the Lakers, this according to our Adrian Wojnarowski. Anthony Davis and Russell Westbrook coexist well enough to win a championship.
Absolutely.
I don't have a problem with that. That's a team that can win the championship.
The Lakers are the clear-cut best team in basketball.
Because Russ will win you regular season games. Russ, as you mentioned, will win you segments of games when LeBron plays and win you games when he doesn't.
Well, as long as LeBron is on the Lakers, I'm going to say that they are contenders.
All of these players, and you're telling me that they're not going to have a 60-win season? Please. Matter of fact, I wouldn't be surprised if they wouldn't scratch the surface of hitting a 70-win season.
Oh, Perk, now you're getting crazy. Come on.
But in the West, it's the Lakers and everybody else. The Lakers are the best team in the West. Chris, the reality is with Russell Westbrook, they're going to wreck the league in the regular season. They're going to be dominant.
Lakers win the title, America. Not sure exactly who's on the roster. Not sure exactly.
Keep talking about my squad, our personal ages, the way he plays, he stays injured. We're past our times in the league, etc., etc., etc. Do me one favor, please. And I mean, please. Keep that same narrative energy when it begins. That's all I ask. Hashtag.
That'll do it. It was that kind of night and that kind of season. If not only that loss, but the Spurs' win have been officially eliminated from playoff contention.
I mean, you would have to say that this is one of the most disappointing years in Laker history, in terms of what was expected of them
relative to expectations
at the start of the season and where they've ended up.
At the end of the 2020 season, the Los Angeles Lakers were the last team standing. And with LeBron and Anthony Davis holding the Finals MVP and Larry O'Brien trophies, the endless amount of moves that were made to put this team in this position all seemed justifiable, as an organization that was seeking justification finished the mission and was deemed champions. In the following season, the team attempted to match that same level of success, however fell short after losing in the first round to the Phoenix Suns. Now, many people identified the biggest problem with the Lakers that year was injuries, as Anthony Davis and LeBron not only missed massive time during the regular season, but also AD went down with an injury in the first round series against the Suns after the Lakers were up 2-1. And because of that line of thinking, as well as the makeup of a few rosters across the league, the ideology of what the Lakers should do in the upcoming offseason was hyper-focused on making major changes. Which is why when the Lakers traded for a 9-time All-NBA player and former MVP in Russell Westbrook, the dialogue across the league was that the Lakers were going to represent the Western Conference entering the NBA Finals, as the star-studded roster out in Hollywood had the second best odds of being named the 2022 NBA champs. And so now, fast forward to where we are today, and I'm pretty sure many people are extremely confused on how a team that had expectations to compete for a championship missed the mark so much so that they didn't even make the playoffs. So what exactly happened, and who was to blame for this team being the biggest disappointment in NBA history? After the Westbrook acquisition, the Lakers went on a signing spree of a bunch of veteran role players, some of which addressed the potential spacing concerns with Wayne Ellington, Kent Bazemore, and Carmelo Anthony. Others provided depth in the front court to add some size alongside Anthony Davis and Dwight Howard and DeAndre Jordan. And just for good measures, the Lakers did sign 2 young players to make sure there was still quality youth surrounding some of the older guys. With this amount of talent, especially the ones that were pegged to be future Hall of Famers, the Lakers were viewed as super teams by many. Now, to be fair to the Lakers, before the season began, there were certainly a lot of doubts and naysayers surrounding the makeup of the roster. Majority of the criticism was based in concerns with the defense, lack of floor spacing, age with the team, and more importantly, how exactly was Westbrook going to fit alongside LeBron and Anthony Davis. When met with the critiques, many people who were optimistic about the roster just believed that majority of this stuff would just work itself out, especially with the amount of experience and Hall of Fame talent on the roster. But pretty quickly into the regular season, it was clear that it wasn't going to be that simple. Because after 2 embarrassing losses to the Suns and Warriors, the Lakers were entered the 3rd game of the season and take a massive blow to the roster. In the middle of the second quarter against the Memphis Grizzlies, a game that the Lakers were going to win, LeBron went down with a nasty injury after Desmond Bane fell awkwardly on his leg. Because of this injury, LeBron was sidelined for the following 2 games, and just a few days after that, it was reported that he had dealt with abdominal pain that would keep him sidelined for the next week or 2, which inevitably translated to LeBron missing 12 out of the first 23 games of the regular season. So yeah, pretty big blow at the beginning of the year. However, this was kind of the purpose of why the Lakers went after another star, as the biggest selling point to why Westbrook was added to the roster is so that the team didn't fall apart when AD and or LeBron were sidelined, regardless if that was just for injuries or them just catching a breather. So even with LeBron sidelined, it was still believed that AD and Westbrook would be more than enough to carry a Lakers team through a fairly weak schedule until he came back. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. After 23 games, the Lakers had a record of 12-11, and the first wave of criticism hit really hard after a tough loss to the Milwaukee Bucks, as Milwaukee was able to walk away with a win despite Lopez not playing and both Jrue Holiday and Chris Middleton having horrible shooting performances.
Spectacular performance by Giannis Antetokounmpo. Shameful performance by Anthony Davis. With or without LeBron James, you have to answer the call. And tonight, Anthony Davis did not answer the challenge.
As the only person up here that felt like the Lakers are still in contention, I understand where you guys are coming from. Playing without LeBron James, it should not look this bad. Coming from the 6-hole, the 7-hole, the 8-hole in the Western Conference, you're not gonna win the championship that way.
Now on the surface, the production from AD and Russ may seem like enough, but it clearly wasn't. And that was true even during games where LeBron was active. Despite Westbrook taking on a lesser role and in some of those games sharing the ball handling responsibilities with LeBron, he was still averaging nearly 5 turnovers a game. The lack of floor spacing also hurt the Lakers offense significantly, especially because at that stage of the season, there were really only 2 really good 3-point shooters in Melo and Wayne Ellington, and it certainly didn't help that Anthony Davis was shooting below 40% from mid. And even when Frank Vogel was attempting to maximize the offense with more 3-point oriented lineups, the defense took a massive hit, so much so that Anthony Davis couldn't cover everybody else's defensive flaws. However, these undeniable facts still did not prevent many people from being optimistic on what this Lakers team could do moving forward, mainly because they believed it was unfair to judge this team so harshly because they were not completely healthy. And to their credit, there was some validity to that argument, but unfortunately for them, and little do they know, the first 20-some games is arguably the best stretch the Lakers had throughout the entire season. And no, that's not a hyperbolic statement, because eventually LeBron did come back, and yes, the big 3 were able to put some reps underneath their belt playing alongside one another. However, the chemistry building was short-lived, because during the game against the Timberwolves, LeBron pushed Jaden McDaniels into Anthony Davis, and this accident resulted in Davis suffering a knee injury, which consequently left him sidelined for an entire month. Now again, this shouldn't be that big of an issue because once more, one of the biggest selling points to adding Russell Westbrook to this team is so the Lakers can survive the games that AD or LeBron were not available to play. But throughout the month that Anthony Davis was absent, it was clear that someone needed to hit the panic button as soon as possible. Because following the loss that the Lakers took against the Timberwolves, they would lose an additional 4 games in a row, and outside of collecting wins against really bad teams, the Lakers stood no chance at all against competent competition. The greatest example of this is when the Lakers lost to the Denver Nuggets by 37 points. A loss so embarrassing that LeBron James himself went on Twitter to publicly apologize to Laker fans. Now, to the credit of the front office and coaching staff, they tried their hardest to find some solutions. The front office went out to seek for some young help for defensive purposes in the front court by signing Stanley Johnson, and the coaching staff experimented with some new lineups. The most noteworthy one is when the Lakers moved LeBron to the 5, as it became so unbearable to watch DeAndre Jordan attempt to play defense. And making that move definitely maximized what this team could do offensively, but it was still clear that it just wasn't enough. But the worst part throughout this entire stretch is how poorly Russell Westbrook was playing. In the 15 games after the Anthony Davis injury, Westbrook was held to under 17 points while shooting below 40% from the field, 26% from 3, and 66% from the free throw line. And even though he was still filling up the stat sheet with his rebounds and assists, he was also still filling up the stat sheet with his turnovers as well, averaging 3.5 a game. And everything came to a head with Westbrook during a game against the Indiana Pacers, where he was performing so poorly that Frank Vogel had no other choice but to pull him in the fourth quarter, because Vogel believed that that was the best option that he could employ to put the Lakers in the best position to win that game. And just to give you more context on how bad this was, the trade deadline was right around the corner, and the poor performances from Westbrook did nothing more but fuel the trade rumors that were circulating around the locker room at that time. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time talking about the Westbrook trade conversations because how many stories conflict one another, but the one thing that has been constant is that the Lakers did attempt to trade Westbrook, but because his trade value dropped so much so due to his poor performances, that the Lakers would have been forced to attach a draft pick alongside Westbrook just to move him, something that the front office just was not willing to do. And what might have been even more surprising is that Frank Vogel wasn't even fired either, as many people believe that if the Lakers were not able to trade Westbrook, then they needed to fire Frank Vogel, as the team needed some drastic changes to hopefully wake up the roster and understand how severe of a situation they are in. But none of that happened. Anthony Davis would eventually come back, but unfortunately that didn't last long, because just a few games after AD made his return, he would be sidelined once more after sustaining an ankle injury against the Utah Jazz, which essentially kept him sidelined for the remainder of the year. And since it was already proven that LeBron and Westbrook just weren't enough to lead this team to wins consistently, they continued to struggle with AD's absence. So much so that by the end of the season, a franchise that was poised to compete for a championship underperformed so poorly that they missed the play-in tournament. When it was all said and done, the Lakers finished the regular season with a record of 33-49, with a bottom 10 offense and defense, and one of the worst net ratings in the league. To put all that in perspective, the season before LA acquired LeBron, back in the day, 2018, when there was a whole bunch of young pups on the roster, the Lakers that season finished with a better record, better defensive rating, and a better net rating. So yeah, pretty bad. So bad that I would go as far as to say that the 2022 Los Angeles Lakers should go down as the biggest disappointment in NBA history, as they not only missed the mark, but they did so severely. Because it would be one thing if a title contending team with this level of talent were to lose in the finals, or even get knocked out in the first round, or maybe even miss the playoffs. But no, this Lakers team was such a disappointment that they couldn't even make the play-in tournament as they finished the season with the 11th seed. And trust me when I say there is no other team in NBA history who missed their expectations that severely. So now that that is established, let's figure out who's to blame. And I'm going to give the smallest slice of blame to LeBron and AD at roughly 5%. Now, the biggest reason why I'm so lean on LeBron and AD has a lot to just do with the fact that they were consistently sidelined throughout the entire year. And even when they were playing, they were performing at all NBA levels, as LeBron nearly led the league in scoring while making his fair share of adjustments, as he averaged the most three-point attempts throughout his entire career while shooting above league average from behind the arc. And Anthony Davis essentially was a 20-10 guy who had to cover up a lot of defensive errors from the rest of his teammates because the whole roster was just bad on that side of the floor. But even with that being said, there are two things that I have to be critical with LeBron and AD. When it comes to Davis, I applaud the fact that he attempted to make some adjustments in his game with his long mid-range jumpers and three-point attempts. However, they just weren't that impactful. Anthony Davis finished the season shooting below 40% on his mid-range jump shots and shooting below 20% from behind the arc. And then when it comes to LeBron, why did you okay this roster being made? Like seriously, I sincerely want to ask LeBron that question. And please spare me the comments about how he said numerous times he's just a player, he's not making the general manager decisions. Stop. Because in the beginning of the season, he openly admitted to being excited about putting the team together.
Well, it was exciting, helping put this team together this summer, understanding what I felt and we all felt that was going to help us be a title contending team.
So LeBron, you're going to have to receive some of this blame for piecing this team together because it is bad. But again, outside of those two things, hard for me to be critical on two players who missed that much time, which then brings us to the next slice of blame pie, and that is injuries, which I'm giving 10% blame to. Now, of course, it's pretty obvious to highlight injuries because I don't believe this team would be performing this poorly if AD and LeBron played 60 plus games this season. But the reason why this is a much smaller slice than I think a lot of people are expecting is because there's no indication that if this team was healthy, that they would have been a championship caliber roster. And the reason why I say it is because when you look at the win percentage amongst the big three, all of them were below 500. When you look at the win percentage of the games that included Russ and AD or Russ and LeBron, those games were also below 500. And even though, yes, it is true, in the 21 games that Russ, LeBron, and AD were all active in, they were above 500. However, they were only one game above 500, which still is noticeably missing the mark for a team that, again, is supposed to be contending for a championship. But if you dig a little bit deeper and look at those 11 games that they won when the big three were active, I mean, honestly, they're just not impressive wins at all. Furthermore, I don't want to harp too much on injuries because at the end of the day, even though yes, it is true, the big three only played in 21 games with one another, but the Lakers still had two of their big three players active in 90% of the games. And no, I don't mean that figuratively. I mean that quite literally. 74 out of the 82 games that were played this season, two of the big three players were active for the Lakers. Up next, we have Frank Vogel, who I'm also going to give just 10%. Now, when it comes to Vogel, I do feel sorry that he ended up losing his job because honestly, it felt like he was a scapegoat for a huge portion of the season. Now, please do not take that opinion of mine as me trying to exempt Vogel from a lot of blame because that's not the case at all. Offensively, Vogel's going to have to adapt to this new age of basketball. His rotations periodically throughout the year were very questionable, and there are several times throughout the year where Vogel should have made in-game adjustments, and he just did not do that. The best example of this is in a recent game where the Wizards beat the Lakers, and down the stretch of that game, Washington basically just gave KP the ball in every single possession, and Vogel didn't make any meaningful adjustments whatsoever. So yeah, Vogel definitely has to be better, but the reason why I'm only giving him 10% is because I'm not expecting him to be a miracle worker. It amazed me throughout the entire season how many people wanted Vogel to coach this team into a top 10 defensive unit. That's literally impossible when you have players like Malik Monk, Wayne Ellington, and Carmelo Anthony receiving more than 25 minutes per game. And similar things can be said on the offensive end as well. So at the end of the day, I'm not going to be too critical on Vogel when at the beginning of the year, they expected him to put in a screw with a hammer. Give him the right tools and he'll be able to succeed. We've seen him do this several times before throughout his career. And heck, even just last year, he coached the Lakers to the #1 ranked defense while Anthony Davis missed massive amount of time throughout the regular season. Okay, let's go ahead and get this out the way. Up next, we have Russell Westbrook, who I'm giving 20% of the blame. Now, part of the reason why it took me so long to upload this video is because I wanted to watch all the exit interviews and any of the leak information that people have been withholding all throughout the year to make the proper judgment call. But I don't want to make it seem like the reason why I gave Westbrook this amount of blame is because of quotes and something that somebody else said that honestly we just cannot prove to be true or not. Because trust me when I say Westbrook played so poorly this season just in terms of his performance that the 20% is more than justifiable. So just speaking facts, in terms of his assists and rebounds, Westbrook was more than respectable in those aspects, but everything else, he was bad. Like really bad. Westbrook finished the season averaging nearly 4 turnovers a game, despite the fact that he shared the ball handling responsibilities with LeBron. This is the first time in his career since his sophomore season that he was held under 20 points per game this year, and he did so while being inefficient, shooting 44% from the field, below 30% from 3, and 66% from the free throw line, which translated to a true shooting percentage of 51%. And just to give you a little bit more perspective on how bad Westbrook was with his jump shot this year, shout out to Kurt Goldsberry as he tweeted out of 66 NBA players who have attempted at least 500 jump shots this year, Westbrook ranked 65th in shooting efficiency. 65th out of 66. Westbrook's jump shot was so bad this year that during a home game against the New York Knicks, Laker fans were literally telling Westbrook, "Don't shoot the ball."
Trying to contain Malik Monk. Westbrook going about it. Crowd kind of telling him no, and he missed it.
Defensively, the effort and concentration from Westbrook was spotty at best. And for someone who receives the title of giving it their all or giving 110%, there's definitely several moments throughout the year that would suggest otherwise. However, none of that surprises me at all, because before the season began, I made a video explaining to people that all of those things that I just highlighted were going to happen before the season began, because the reality is that that is who Westbrook is as a player. But even with that being said, there are two things with Westbrook this year that really threw me back. The first one being how bad of a finisher at the rim Westbrook was. I mean, he was missing a lot of layups and even some dunks as well that I thought was just completely unacceptable. And even looking at the numbers, they kind of back this up as well, as Westbrook converted less than 55% of his layups. But the second thing that really surprised me is that the drop in production I was expecting from Westbrook was going to happen because he was going to be the third option. But when you take into consideration injuries, Russ was actually the first or second option, and yet he still performed this poorly. Now, I know for a fact that many people are going to highlight that this team was not built in a way to maximize Westbrook as a player, and I totally agree. I've been saying this for literally months now. But even with that being true, I then ask you this: what team in the NBA that's trying to win a championship will build a roster around Westbrook's needs? The answer to that question is none. Westbrook is not a good enough player to where a title contending team should feel comfortable with building a roster around Westbrook. So the truth of the matter is Westbrook's going to have to make sacrifices and adjustments regardless. And once you acknowledge that, you start to realize how concerning it is that there are reports claiming that Westbrook was defiant of Frank Vogel's coaching style from the beginning of the season. It's concerning when Westbrook doesn't have the self-awareness to understand why people may question him in a new role, because this was a new team with new teammates in a third option role that he's never played before, with a system that did not best benefit his playing style, and the ultimate goal was to win a championship, something he's never achieved either. So the questions and concerns were definitely legitimate, but even if I were to give Westbrook some slack, after performing the way he did all season long, did nothing more but justify the concerns that many people had before the beginning of the season. So why are you so dumbfounded by why people are going to question you? If you continue to perform the way that you perform, that's what we're basing it off on. And most importantly, it is concerning when Russell Westbrook, in an attempt to measure how great he was this season, does not look at how he impacted the win and loss columns, but rather comparing himself statistically in previous years. Which is crazy when you stop to think about it. Even if I were to be very forgiving with this quote, it is still a crazy quote. Because if Westbrook ever wants to reach the ultimate goal and win a championship, which is something that he said in the beginning of the season, the sacrificing that he will have to make will result in him no longer averaging a triple-double, which is fine. That just means that he has to find other ways to impact the game of basketball, which is very concerning that it sounds like Westbrook doesn't grasp that concept. So yeah, I have to give Westbrook 20%, and if I were to take that last quote in its literal sense, it sounds like you're more concerned with stats than actually winning ball games. And if that is the case, then the blame has to be exponentially higher. But I'm trying to be fair because I don't believe that you are that type of a player. Now, the next bit of blame has to go to the fans and media. Now, I know this may seem like a cop-out because neither one of these entities play a single minute for the Lakers, nor are they directly correlated with this organization. However, it's important to still highlight the fans and the media because at the end of the day, they are the ones who set the expectations that the Lakers were not able to meet, thus making them a disappointment. So when it comes to the delusional fans and media members, all I have to say is this. Why is it that you are this dumb, making arguments that stupid that's literally just based in emotional ignorance? It is amazing to me how many people thought this team was going to be great, not because of their defense, not because of what they can do schematically, not even because they viewed the Western Conference as quote unquote weak or wide open, but simply because the name that is on the back of the jersey, simply because of the resume that they've built, simply because they are future Hall of Famers. I don't understand the premise of that argument because what somebody may have done 5, 7, 10 years ago has literally nothing to do with what is going on right now, especially because the role and the responsibilities that these players are going to have on this team was going to be drastically different from what we've seen out of them throughout their entire career. So you referencing what somebody may have done in 2017 has nothing to do with what he's going to do in 2022. Why are you that dumb? Why is it that you become so emotional when somebody just criticizes your favorite player on something that is an identifiable flaw? Russell Westbrook turns the ball over a lot. He cannot space out the floor. He's not a good defender. He's not a good fit for the team. Yet I have morons making whole video synopses about what I am conveying to people that are just factually correct. And to me, that is the bigger problem, is that some of you all can't even identify how dumb you sound when you make these arguments. And what makes it worse is that you don't even understand the damage that you end up doing to these players. Nobody is trying to put Westbrook on this pedestal of greatness at this stage of his career except for delusional fans. So because that's all we hear over and over again, Westbrook this, Westbrook that, LeBron this, LeBron that, AD this, AD that. I mean, my goodness, people were comparing Anthony Davis to Tim Duncan. It was disgusting what I saw just a few years ago. And then we have to even hear from media members as well. So then you have all these people put all these players on this pedestal. And then when everything unfolds and the Lakers are massively underperforming, you then get upset when people start to quote unquote hate on these players, because nobody would not have to say Westbrook is overrated if it wasn't for you overly rating him. This right here is a great example. The natural pivot to LeBron hate for people who are trying to assert themselves in the sports world is so predictable, it's actually bad. First of all, not trying to assert myself in the sports world. I've been doing it for years now. And secondly, I wouldn't have to say the things if people like you didn't overrate LeBron by saying things like, LeBron is the MVP this year, LeBron's still the best player in the league, or claiming that when the Lakers get into full rhythm, that is going to be similar to the Miami Heat Big Three a few years ago. So again, the only reason why I'm saying LeBron is overrated is because people like you keep saying dumb things like this. So when you pedestalize these players and franchises to unrealistic expectations, then yes, it's going to be a massive disappointment based off of the expectations that you set. So don't be upset at Westbrook, LeBron, AD, or Vogel. Don't be upset at me. Don't be upset at other YouTubers. Don't be upset at other people in the NBA community. Be upset at yourself for being that dumb, because you are the problem. And finally, the biggest slice of blame pie has to go to the front office at 30%. Because at the end of the day, regardless of what everyone else did, Rob Pelinka and the rest of the brain trust with the Los Angeles Lakers are the individuals who put this team together. Yes, there were problems with Vogel, Westbrook, AD, and injuries, but at the end of the day, the front office didn't give Vogel the right pieces. The front office put a bunch of older players who also deal with injuries alongside one another. And regardless of how they want to spin it, the front office co-signed on receiving Russell Westbrook. And even if I were to subscribe to the ideology that LeBron is the one making all the decisions out there in LA, even if that is the case, Rob Pelinka needs to lose his job right now and hand over his salary to LeBron, since he is the one who's making all the decisions over there. Furthermore, the level of unprofessionalism from this front office over the course of 5 to 6 years now has been embarrassing, especially the way they treated Frank Vogel by firing him while he's in the middle of coaching a game. And also you have the articles claiming that the front office believed that the best way to get Westbrook to play better was by humiliating him. Disgusting. And you're not going to fool me. This front office is poorly ran, and it will continue to be a joke of a franchise unless the people at the top can get it all together or get out of the organization. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Please let me know what you think about the video in the comment section below. Huge shout out to my team and No Layups and Classy for helping me piece together this crazy video. And also, if you are wondering how is it that the Lakers are poorly managed, click the video on the screen right now. I actually made a whole video about it. And until next time, I'll see you all later. Peace.